Welcome to the Voices for Voices podcast, sponsored by Redwood Living. Thank you for joining us today. I am Justin Allen Hayes, founder and executive director of Voices for Voices, host, and humanitarian. You can learn more about Voices for Voices on our Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube channel at Voices for Voices, and also our website at voicesforvoices.org. Voices for Voices is a 501c3 nonprofit charity organization that survives solely on donations. So if you are able to, please consider heading over to voicesforvoices.org to help us continue our mission and the goal and dream to help 3 billion people over the course of my lifetime and beyond. Or you can also send a donation to the mailing address of Voices for Voices. That's at 2388 Beckett Circle, Stowe, Ohio 44224. Or we're also on the Cash App at Voices for Voices. Are you or somebody you know looking for a volunteer opportunity? If so, please reach out to us today via email at president@voicesforvoices.org. Now, I founded Voices for Voices to provide a platform for folks to share their stories with others as we work to break the stigma around mental health, accessibility, and disabilities, while also helping people get the help they need and helping them prepare or transition into the workforce with the Voices for Voices Career Center, where we connect talent with opportunity for both job seekers and employers alike, from coast to coast and in every industry and job level. And who can forget about merchandise? The Voices for Voices merch shop is up and running at voicesforvoices.org/shop, where shipping is always free, and again, all donations are 100% tax deductible. Now, joining us today is an author and a disability advocate and mother, and she's joining us from the great state of Texas. Please join me in welcoming to the show Rosalie Mastaler. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
Absolutely. Excited to talk to a fellow author and another individual. Like your site website says, you're promoting hope, and that's through the books, it's through blogs, it's through interviews, through podcasts like you're doing today. And for our audience, listeners and viewers, and those who will be reading the transcript of this episode, can you maybe give a little background about how you became an author and a disability advocate, and maybe one came before the other, and I think they kind of go together. So whatever may be easier for you.
Yeah, such a good question, because I feel like they work well together. And I've always had a love for storytelling and for writing. And luckily, I'm able to combine those two loves of advocacy and writing. And I was kind of thrown into the disability world with my son, because back in 2015, there was an accident, and our dog attacked him, and it had damaged his leg so bad they had to amputate his leg. So all of a sudden, we were in this disability world, and we didn't really know what to do. And we started with Google, and we looked at people who had disabilities that were like him, and we just kind of journeyed through. And then a few years later, he actually was diagnosed with bilateral hearing loss. So he's hard of hearing and has hearing aids. And so all of a sudden we had another disability that we were trying to figure out. And as he recovered and as the years went by, I saw this huge hole in literature, because I wanted to find books for my son and for the rest of my children. He's the oldest of 3 boys, and he's now 12. And so I found this huge gap in publishing, and only 3.5% of books published have featured characters with disabilities. And that was from a statistic done back in 2019. So I think it's maybe gotten a little bit better. Maybe we're at 5%. But I realized, I can take my love for storytelling, my love for being an advocate and advocating for my son, and combine the two and see what I could come up with. And so from there, I went on the journey of learning more about storytelling to children and just what works. I joined critique groups. I joined the Society of Children's Books Writers and Authors, or illustrators. I just did everything I could so I can make sure I could tell a good story. And so my first book is coming out in June. I'm starting there. And then my son is actually helping me write our next book after that.
Awesome. And how I became aware of you and the work that you've done is through looking into some research and being connected with individuals who do work, whether they're an author or an advocate because of a child or somebody they know, to, like you said, to bridge that gap with the literature, not having a lead character that children with disabilities or challenges that they can relate to. Because I even know for myself, seeing a character in a book, reading about it, seeing pictures, photos, it's important to be able to relate to as a human being, let alone a child, and then a child that may have challenges, and to be able to bring all that together and just have literature about the human being that looks and feels like them is important. And so I want to congratulate you to being able to do that, to be able to be one of the authors out there that is doing that, because I think that's really, really important. Because I think if children don't see themselves in books, then they might start to doubt themselves, and we don't want that. As adults, we already do that enough, I think, that we don't need to be reaffirmed on that. And so how is your background in writing, being an author, education, or certificates? How did that come about?
Yeah, I've always loved writing. It's always been something I've done just for fun. And I remember reading this book, and it's a book called Finish, and it's all about finishing things and how we usually finish the things that we love, right? Because we all have our own passions. And I remember him saying that sometimes we get older and we, in a sense, discover new passions or new hobbies, something that we want to pursue. But most of the time, we're going back to something that we already had a love for and that we didn't necessarily get to pursue in that moment in time. And it's funny because as I've taken this journey of writing, we've been moving for the past few years, and I've been able to dig up old things of how our parents keep awards when we're sixth grade, all of a sudden, I pull out an award or pull out old journals and stuff. And in sixth grade, I remember I found this little journal. It's about me. I'm in sixth grade now. What do I write? And in sixth grade, I wrote, when I grow up, I want to be a writer. And I don't even remember writing that or even having those feelings. And then it just kind of was I do love this. I love this so much. And I've poured a lot into researching just how children's books work. What works for a child, what's going to entertain them, what is going to keep them reading it more than once. And I would just go to the library and take a giant stack of books and read them. And regarding representation and people with disabilities seeing themselves in books, I feel like my mission is twofold. I want children to be able to say, hey, that person's just like me. And I want children to be able to see a world beyond themselves. And I feel like that's almost a little more important, because there's, the disability community, they are in the minority. So the majority of the children who see this book, I'm hoping, aren't the ones that are like the main character, but they're the ones that need to see them. They need to see that world. They need to see someone who doesn't look like them, because that's where inclusion will happen.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that it's huge for those of us that we don't have those challenges, and it helps us to accept people for who they are. I know with my 4-year-old daughter at her age, she thankfully is at this point fully functioning and able to do everything on her own that she's supposed to do. And it's important with some of the books and even just some of the experiences and examples that my wife and I talk about, that it's okay to read a book or to see somebody out in public that might look a little bit different from us. A good example, I'm reading Saved from Benjamin Hall, the reporter that was in Ukraine. His car got bombed, a couple people ended up passing away, and I believe he had one leg amputated, and I'm not quite sure about the other leg. And so I was reading about that, and my daughter, she came up and saw the book, and she's like, "Oh, you have recipes," and like the 4-year-old, like, "Oh yeah, I got a book of recipes." And then she started paging through, and in the middle there were some photos, and the photos were of Benjamin before the accident, kind of during, as he's going through treatment, and kind of where he's at today. And so she was asking me, she's like, why doesn't he have a leg on this side? And so trying to just explain to a 4-year-old, or just get in that mindset of being prepared to talk about that it's okay. And I think that's part of the reason why I wanted to read this story, just to learn about somebody else's experience, and that today might not look exactly like me, and that's okay. But to be able to learn, like, how did he get through it? What types of challenges has he had, and how's he overcome, to be able to inspire and help others, to show, what, I'm not going to give up. I'm going to continue on in life. So how growing up with Hunter post accident, how did he take the news when the decision was made, and maybe it was made when he's at the hospital and under anesthesia? I don't know, but like when he maybe came to it and realized, was it a shock to him?
Yes, very much so. I think what worked against us was his age. He was not so young to where it was like, okay, like my body's just a little bit different, I'm gonna just kind of get up and adapt. And then he wasn't old enough to where he could rationalize. So he was about 4.5 years, so right around your daughter's age, around 4.5 years old, yeah. And when he realized that it was gone, it was just so much confusion. And it was a really, really dark and difficult time for our family, because he just did not understand it. And not only did he not understand it, he did not want to accept it. He asked if we could go look for his leg. He asked if we could go back to the hospital to get it. And to try and explain that to him was nearly impossible. And I think that's what it came down to. Like, I couldn't explain it to him. He was going to have to try and figure it out on his own. And what really helped, though, was a few months after he lost his leg, we went to a camp with other kids who had limb differences. And that it wasn't like a night and day difference, but I think for him to see other kids who were like him, and adults as well, just kind of made him to not feel so alone, and realize, okay, I am missing my leg, but there's other people out there like me. And I don't know what was going through his head at the time. He had turned 5 the weekend we went to camp. He turned 5. And then after that, it was a slow progression. And about 8 months later is when he finally took his first step. So it was a very long process, emotionally, mentally, and physically.
Yeah. How was it for you and your husband to see your son kind of go through that? Having gone through trauma myself, and having mental illness, and having some very dark days, and a 5-day inpatient stay at a hospital, to be diagnosed. I know it's hard for anybody, but I just thinking to my daughter, I don't know how I would how I would kind of go on. I'd be maybe thinking to myself like, okay, Justin, you did something wrong, even if I didn't. How were you able to get through those initial days?
I felt like I wanted to be the example for Hunter and my husband too. But I felt like I have to make sure I'm figuring out everything else for myself and figuring out, okay, this is our new reality. And if I sit and wallow and be bitter and just be upset, then what is that teaching him? And so I really took it upon myself to just really try and be positive, but not a toxic positive, but to just help him understand, okay, this is how things are now. We have to find a way to move on. We have to find a way to just keep pushing forward because this isn't going to change. And we can't live lives and our lives unhappy. That's not worth it. It's not worth it to just be unhappy and to be sad. So I mean, there were a lot of struggles. I had to fight a lot with insurance. I had to figure out how to get him prosthetics. That was, and I feel like that probably kept me really, really busy, that maybe I didn't even have the time to, sit and cry. But I mean, there were times that we did even cry together. I really tried to feel like we have these feelings, so we're going to have these feelings, but let's figure out how to get through these feelings and not push them down and not sit on them and let them just stir inside of us for days and months and months.
Yeah, that's very inspiring to be able to do that, and commend you for being able to do that. To think of being the example and wanting to spend your days happy, not sad, and that's incredible to think about that experience and to be able to be that example. So as Hunter began to have a few days and months after losing his leg, and I guess I don't know at what point he wanted to start inspiring others. Where was that after the acceptance of saying, okay, I'm accepting where I'm at, and I can probably help, and maybe it's just them seeing somebody like themselves, or maybe it's somebody talking through videos or Instagram reels, like I read a little bit about on the site. So can you walk through like that process, and then maybe how it makes you feel as he's doing that, and then obviously with the books and really just hitting it on all angles.
Yeah. So let's see, it was probably around, it was a few years after that I started to write our story because I felt very inspired and this very strong prompting to just get our story onto paper. And I started writing our story as a memoir for adults. And I think we all do this with our talents. It's like if we have a talent for something, we might as well use it. And if we feel strongly about something, we might, if it's there, you gotta move forward with it. So I started off with a memoir, and I finished my memoir after like a few years. It took some time, and then we started to like build a platform online, and it was kind of like just kind of throwing it into the wind of like, okay, let's just see what sticks and let's just try it out and see if we even like it. Because Hunter was getting older at this point. And one of the first videos that we made that went viral was him walking on Legos. And like all of a sudden it like blew up. It had millions of views. And I was like, okay, we're like onto something. People think it's funny. We think it's funny. And we're also kind of spreading awareness and disability visibility, all those good things. And so we just kind of took it from there and ran. And my memoir is still, it's done, but we're still in the works of getting that published. But then I did shift gears to picture books because you had asked about my background and experience. I've always worked with children. I love working with children. I am actually a music teacher. I have taught piano and voice forever. Ever since I was a teenager, taught English in Russia. I was a nanny. I ran community theater with kids. Like I just love working with kids, and so this was kind of my niche. I'm like, you know what? Let me hit the picture book scene because I love it so much. I love kid books, and then Hunter, he has a passion for like nonfiction. He loves watching documentaries. I think he loves learning about people. And so we decided, I'm like, there's like no books out there about famous people with disabilities, or there's very few. And so Hunter and I were like, you know what? Let's find all the people that we know and love that have a disability, and let's put their stories into a book. And let's have that be our book. And so we have Represent Volume 1 coming out in the fall, and he helped me compile all the biographies. We picked 30 people, we researched them together, and so we're coming to the tail end of that. We're not illustrating it, but the editing on the illustrating is the last thing, so we're almost done with that one.
So what's it like working with an illustrator, coming from the nonfiction of talk about my mental health and in career preparation and transition, haven't really, outside of the cover, the outer part, work with an individual, but I can imagine that it would take maybe more time to do. And how does that work where you have the manuscript part done and then you reach out to the illustrator, or is it an iterative process? Can you maybe just talk maybe high level about that for
Yeah,
somebody who might be
so
interested in something like that?
yeah, and there's a lot of different processes. If you end up being going with like a larger publisher, they have illustrators on hand,
Okay.
and there's a process with picking illustrators for that. Like you kind of get to pick the style, but then they go for it and they kind of run with it.
Yeah.
So I am with the smaller press. It's still more of the process of being traditionally published, so it's not independent publishing. So I was able to find my own illustrators. I have two different illustrators, but it's very much okay. Here's my story, and here are some of my visions for like very specific things, and then I try and just let them take most of the liberties. What has been difficult, especially for this nonfiction one, is that they're drawing people with disabilities. Well, I've been researching and following the disability world for years and years and years. Now, all of a sudden, they're not even adjacent to someone with a disability, and now all of a sudden they have to draw them. So there's been like little things of like, hey, fix this prosthetic, or put sunglasses on them because they're blind, and just little things like that. Not all blind people wear sunglasses, but he typically does. So it has been a process, and yes, it does take longer because you basically have two people working on it, and you're waiting for them to finish after the manuscript is finished. And so it has been a process, but there's many different ways to go about it.
Interesting. Yeah. And so I see uh, many books on your bookshelf behind you. Uh, all these are in that space, having
Yes.
characters that are showing like individuals that they can see themselves in those stories.
Yes, this is my beloved collection. I even have some on a top shelf up
Oh,
there.
perfect.
Those are more memoirs and middle grade. Um, some are traditionally published with bigger publishers, some are independently published, but I have my favorites for sure. And I feel like it's a treasure hunt because these books, they're not out there. Like they're a little bit hard to find. So whenever I find one, especially a new one, I'm like, yes, it's like finding a diamond in the rough. I'm like, I found a new one and I love it. But it's just like any other picture book. I read some that I don't love so much, and then others, I'm like, yes, they hit the nail on the head. So,
Right. So distribution is a little bit tough. So where can viewers, listeners find books that are catered more to that inclusive audience that they might not see in maybe the traditional outlets, the traditional bookstores?
yeah, so there's a few ways to go about it. I actually just recently, because my book just went on pre-sale, and so I was looking to see where I was at in the rankings
Yeah.
of when you go on Amazon, it shows you, oh, it's #1 in children's books about humor or children's books about first day of school. They have all of these categories. And so what you can do is search those categories. So if you find one book with a disability, scroll down and look at those categories that they're in. They're kind of, there's a specific name for it. But if you click on like children's books about disabilities, you click on that and you see an entire list of those. The hard part is knowing which ones have the most appropriate representation. Because I've found books that were even on the top 5 list that I wouldn't recommend to people. And so what I recommend is finding reputable sources. There are a lot of people who have platforms that share only about books, diverse books. And you have to find those trusted people of like, what, they recommended it. They've talked about why they like it, and then go from there. I'm not the best at blogging, but I usually on my blog will talk about the ones that I specifically recommend. So Amazon's a great way, and then finding those trusted people that really promote these books.
Perfect. And so that leads into my next question about where can people learn more about you, the work you do, the books, your blog, follow your son to keep up with everything that's going on.
Yeah, so on my website, most of our stuff is there, and it's my name, RosalieMastaler.com, and then we have our Instagram platform, which is Mass Taylor Party of 5. And we have a Facebook, and so most of our stuff is just out there online. Our first book is out for pre-sale right now, and then our second book hopefully will be out. We didn't mean for both books to come out in the same year. It is a little bit of a whirlwind. But you asked about working with illustrators.
Yeah.
And my first illustrator broke her wrist at one point. So
gosh.
it pushed back production of that book, which meant they got pushed together more.
Okay.
So we have both books coming out this year, which was not the plan, but we're just running with it because we're excited to get both of them out. So instead of pushing that second one back, we're just going to release it this year too.
Oh gosh. Yeah, that's so exciting. Taking what life is presenting and going with it. So you just mentioned with having somebody you're working with have a little bit of a setback, and that pushes things together. So the plan was not in the same year, but it is, and so go with it and embrace it. I love that. What else can we share with the viewers, the listeners, about you, about the advocacy work you do, about your son, that we can make sure we get everything covered?
Yeah, well, I feel like I'm just the messenger here. I am lucky enough to love what I'm doing and just kind of be that middleman. But what I encourage, because I know I'm like super interesting, but I would rather direct people to learn about the disability community from those who have disabilities. There is someone that I follow that I absolutely love. They're called the Couch Pulls. And one thing that they just came up with was, it's like a business card, and on the back of the business card is a QR code. And when you scan it, it takes you to a whole bunch of platforms of people with disabilities who are really strong advocates and activists. And that's where I want to lead people. I just want to be that middleman. And I also want to put out good literature too, which will hopefully lead them to want to learn more about the disability community, learn about inclusion, learn about awareness. And luckily I have my son who's helping me on that second one. But I wanted to lead people to the right people, and that's my main goal.
Yeah, that's exciting. That's awesome to be able to have the resources and share those to, like you said, get to the right advocates, the right authors, the right people, that while everybody's trying, maybe for one reason or another, some are falling a little bit short and that full representation for whatever reason. And so I'm glad that you're doing that, because I think that's important, that whether it's a catchphrase or a catch thing or a societal thing, people sometimes jump at things and go, oh, I want to be part of this, I want to do that, so let me go do this. But those individuals might not do the research like you and the individuals that you're advocating for. So I think that's so important to have, again, those trusted and accepted, not the fly-by-night individuals or organizations that sometimes have ulterior motives, that we're getting the right people, the right information, and really supporting those people, especially yourself, and going really that extra mile, not just being an advocate through interviews, but putting that together in book form. That's going to have a much bigger reach than just maybe a interview or an event appearance. Well, those are great. Being able to have books that somebody in Ohio and Massachusetts and Alaska and Hawaii have access to be able to do, not just where you have your hometown or where I have my hometown. And I think that's awesome to be able to do. And it always helps to help solidify the story and say, oh, by the way, here's something that's tangible about the story. So I just want to give a big thank you to Rosalie for joining us today, for talking and speaking so strongly about being an advocate, an author for not only her son, but so many out there that need to be able to be represented in a positive light and to see others in themselves. So thank you, Rosalie, for joining us today. We had a pleasant conversation, and I learned a ton, was taking some notes to make sure that I'm able to share those in the show notes, but then also make a couple posts about it so people can find you and then find those sources to be able to lead them. And if we can help one person, that's one less person that has to feel alone or in the dark. And I think that's, as human beings, that's really what we're trying to do, is help people. And I'm just thankful to have you as a guest on the podcast today.
Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. Like I said, it's great being the messenger, but I love these opportunities, and I'm grateful to have this opportunity. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. Absolutely. And also want to give a thank you to our audience, our viewers, our listeners. Thank you also for joining us. I say thank you to Rosalie again for taking time out of her day. And until next time, I am Justin Allen Hayes. We hope you have a great day and be a voice for you or somebody in need.